You picked the wrong woman to mess with tonight. Those words would echo through a Miami courtroom 3 months later. But on that humid August evening in 2023, Major Diana Rodriguez had no idea her life was about to change forever. The interstate stretched endlessly ahead, barely lit by scattered streetlights that flickered against the thick Florida darkness. It was almost midnight, the kind of hour when smart people stay home and trouble finds those who don't. Diana had been driving for nearly 3 hours, her fingers tapping against the steering wheel to an old salsa melody drifting from her radio. She wasn't wearing her Air Force uniform, just a casual white blouse and dark slacks. Hair down, makeup minimal. She looked like any other woman heading home after a long day. That's exactly what she thought she was. Then came the lights. Red and blue strobes filled her rearview mirror, growing larger by the second. Her stomach dropped, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She knew this dance too well. Signal right, ease to the shoulder, hands visible, breathe steady. 20 years in the military teaches you protocols that civilians never learn. A white patrol cruiser slid behind her, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Just two vehicles sitting on the side of I-95, emergency lights painting the asphalt in harsh colors. Diana watched through her mirror as the officer finally emerged. A stocky man, moving with the swagger of someone who expected instant obedience. His nameplate caught the light as he approached. Patterson. License and registration. No hello, no explanation, no courtesy. His voice carried the flat authority of a man who'd said those words thousands of times before. Diana reached slowly for her documents, movements deliberate and visible. May I ask why you stopped me, officer? Patterson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her papers like they contained state secrets, his flashlight beam dancing across her face. When he finally spoke, his words made her blood run cold. Brake lights out, she frowned. That's impossible. I had my car serviced last week. You questioning me? His tone shifted, becoming sharper, more predatory. And there it was, that moment every person of color recognizes. The invisible line being drawn, the unspoken challenge hanging in the humid night air. Diana had faced enemy fire in 3 combat zones, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. I'm simply stating facts, she replied, keeping her voice level. But if there's an issue, I'll get it fixed immediately. Patterson's jaw tightened. Step out of the vehicle. The words hit her like a physical blow. She glanced at the empty highway. No witnesses, no backup, no protection except her own courage and whatever justice system waited on the other side of this nightmare. Officer, I need to understand. Now! His shout cut through the night air like a blade. Diana's training kicked in. Assess the threat, control the breathing, stay alive. She unbuckled her seatbelt with movements so slow they seemed choreographed. The humid air hit her face as she stepped onto the asphalt. Patterson was already moving, circling her like a predator who'd found wounded prey. Turn around, hands on the car. This time she didn't hesitate, not because she was afraid, but because she was calculating. Every military operation she'd ever planned started with gathering intelligence, and right now she needed to know exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. Officer, she said, placing her palms against the warm metal of her car roof, I need you to understand something very clearly. Patterson froze mid-step. Something in her tone, calm, controlled, deadly serious, made him pause. I know exactly what my rights are, Diana continued, her voice carrying across the empty highway like a promise. And I know exactly what you can't do. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Patterson's face. But then his ego kicked in, drowning out whatever survival instinct might have warned him to walk away. You're under arrest, he snarled, reaching for his handcuffs. Diana didn't resist as the metal bit into her wrists, too tight, deliberately painful. She didn't cry out when he shoved her toward his patrol car. She simply memorized every detail, every violation, every piece of evidence that would soon destroy his career. Because Patterson had made one critical error in judgment. He thought Diana Rodriguez was just another victim, He was about to learn how wrong he could be. What Patterson didn't know would change everything. But first, Diana had to survive the longest night of her life, and what happened in that jail cell would set in motion a chain of events that would rock the entire Miami-Dade Police Department to its core. The patrol car's plastic seat felt like sitting on broken glass. Diana's wrists burned where the handcuffs cut into her skin. Patterson had made sure they were tight enough to leave marks. Through the reinforced partition, she watched him swagger back to his vehicle, muttering something into his radio with the satisfied grin of a man who thought he'd won. But Patterson had no idea what he'd just set in motion. The Miami-Dade County Jail loomed ahead like a concrete fortress, its harsh fluorescent lights bleeding through the humid night air. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few patrol cars scattered near the entrance, their occupants probably dealing with the usual late-night crowd of drunks and petty criminals. Diana sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her mind racing through possibilities. She'd been in hostile territory before, but never like this. Never as the prisoner instead of the liberator. Patterson killed the engine and turned to look at her through the partition. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Ready for your new accommodations?" She met his eyes in the reflection, saying nothing. That silence seemed to unnerve him more than any protest would have. "You know," he continued, stepping out of the car, "most people just keep their mouths shut when I tell them to step out of their vehicle." The door beside her swung open with a metallic screech. "But not you!" Patterson grabbed her arm, hauling her out with unnecessary force. "You had to be difficult." Diana's feet found solid ground, her military posture instinctively straightening despite the restraints. "Most officers don't arrest people for asking questions." Patterson's laugh was ugly, dismissive. "Lady, you really think you're somebody special, don't you?" She looked at him, really looked at him, studying the way he carried himself, the casual cruelty in his eyes, the badge he wore like a license to hurt people. "I don't think anything," she said quietly. "I know." That made him pause, just for a heartbeat. His grip tightened on her arm, and she could feel the moment when his confidence wavered. But it passed quickly, buried under years of unchecked authority. "Military?" he asked, his tone suddenly shifting. Diana didn't answer, which seemed to confirm his suspicions. "Yeah, I figured," Patterson continued, marching her toward the entrance. "You got that attitude, that think you're above the law attitude." His voice carried a sneer. "Bet you thought I'd back down once you started throwing your weight around." The jail's automatic doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and stale coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. A bored-looking desk sergeant glanced up from his paperwork, then immediately went back to ignoring them. This was routine for him, just another arrest in another endless night. "If I just kept quiet," Diana said, as Patterson led her through the booking process, "would you have let me go?" He grinned, positioning her in front of the camera for her mugshot. "Maybe. Guess we'll never know now." The flash exploded in her face, but Diana didn't blink. She stared directly into the lens, her expression calm and composed. This photo would be evidence later, evidence of a woman who refused to be broken. Fingerprints came next, then the humiliating inventory of her personal belongings. Wallet, keys, phone, all of it disappeared into a manila envelope that Patterson sealed with obvious satisfaction. "Enjoy your stay," he sneered, grabbing her wrist to lead her toward the holding cells. The cell block was a maze of concrete and steel, the air thick with the sounds of restless prisoners and fluorescent lights that never dimmed. Diana's cell was at the end of the corridor, a 6x8 box with a metal bench, a stainless steel toilet, and bars that seemed to mock the very concept of freedom. Patterson shoved her inside with enough force to make her stumble, but Diana caught herself before she fell. She turned to face him through the bars, her expression unchanged. "You think you're tough," Patterson said, tapping the bars with his fingers. "But in here, nobody cares about your attitude." The lock clicked into place with a sound like a judge's gavel. Patterson walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Diana sank onto the metal bench, the cold steel pressing through her clothes. She closed her eyes and began to count. Not sheep, but the violations she'd witnessed in the past hour. Unlawful detention, excessive force, denial of due process. Each one a nail in Patterson's professional coffin. Hours passed. The jail settled into its nighttime rhythm. Distant voices, clanging doors, the occasional burst of profanity from other cells. Diana remained perfectly still, drawing on meditation techniques learned during survival training. Then, around 3 a.m., footsteps approached her cell. Patterson appeared in the corridor, no longer wearing his earlier swagger. His uniform was wrinkled, his face flushed, and there was something different in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even a hint of fear. "Comfortable?" he asked, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Diana opened her eyes slowly, studying him. "I'm exactly where I need to be." That simple statement seemed to shake him more than any threat could have. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, glancing back toward the main corridor as if expecting someone to appear. "Look," Patterson said, lowering his voice. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe—" "Maybe what?" Diana's voice was perfectly calm. "Maybe you realized you made a mistake." Patterson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, another officer appeared in the corridor, a younger man carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone delivering bad news. "Sergeant Patterson," the officer called out, slightly out of breath. "You need to come up front. There's been a call." Diana watched Patterson's face change as the words sank in. The color drained from his cheeks, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What kind of call?" Patterson's voice was barely above a whisper. The younger officer glanced nervously at Diana, then back at his superior. "I think you better take this one privately, sir." Patterson looked at Diana one more time, and in that moment, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Genuine fear. The kind of fear that comes when a predator realizes it's wandered into the wrong territory. As the two officers walked away, their hushed conversation echoing off the concrete walls, Diana allowed herself a small smile. The trap was beginning to close. Patterson thought he was in control, but powerful people had already been set in motion. And what Diana knew about leverage was about to turn this entire situation upside down. The question wasn't whether Patterson would face consequences, it was how far his world would crumble when the truth finally came to light. The Miami-Dade courthouse buzzed with morning energy as lawyers shuffled between courtrooms and clerks processed endless stacks of paperwork. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across marble floors that had witnessed thousands of battles between justice and power. Diana stood near the defendant's table, but everything about her presence commanded attention. Gone were the handcuffs and orange jumpsuit. Instead, she wore a sharp charcoal blazer over a crisp white blouse, her posture radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes from leading people through life and death situations. She wasn't alone. Beside her, attorney Sarah Chen moved with surgical precision, organizing documents with the methodical efficiency of someone who had never lost a case like this. Chen was a legend in civil rights law, the kind of lawyer that corrupt cops had nightmares about. "How are you feeling?" Chen asked quietly, not looking up from her papers. Diana's response was measured, controlled. "Like I'm about to watch justice work the way it's supposed to." The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and Patterson walked in. He still carried himself with that familiar swagger, but there was something different now. A tension in his shoulders, a slight hesitation in his step. His eyes found Diana's across the room, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. Judge Maria Gonzalez entered, and the room fell silent. At 62, Gonzalez had built a reputation as someone who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, or officers who thought their badges made them untouchable. "Let's proceed," she announced, settling into her chair. I've reviewed the initial filings, and I have some serious concerns about this arrest. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Lisa Torres, stood immediately. Your Honor, after reviewing the evidence, the state believes this arrest was conducted without probable cause. Furthermore, we've uncovered information that suggests a disturbing pattern of behavior by the arresting officer. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Patterson shifted in his seat, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Judge Gonzalez peered over her glasses. What kind of pattern, counselor? Torres lifted a thick folder from her table. Sergeant Patterson has conducted 47 traffic stops in the past 18 months. 39 of those stops involved drivers of color. Of those 39 stops, 32 resulted in arrests or citations for minor infractions. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Patterson's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists under the table. Additionally, Torres continued, we need to address who Sergeant Patterson actually arrested that night. Diana felt the room's energy shift. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment when Patterson would learn exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Your Honor, Torres announced, the defendant is Major Diana Rodriguez, United States Air Force. She's a decorated combat veteran with 3 tours in Afghanistan, a graduate of the Air Force Academy, and currently serves as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations at MacDill Air Force Base. The silence that followed was deafening. Patterson's face went white as the full implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. He hadn't just arrested a random woman. He'd detained a high-ranking military officer whose disappearance had triggered calls from the Pentagon to the mayor's office. Judge Gonzalez leaned forward, her expression darkening. Sergeant Patterson, please explain to me how a routine traffic stop for a supposed brake light violation escalated to the arrest of a major in the United States Air Force. Patterson's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge silenced him with a look. I asked Sergeant Patterson to explain. Patterson stood slowly, his swagger completely gone. Your Honor, the defendant she was uncooperative during the stop. Uncooperative how? Judge Gonzalez's voice carried the sharp edge of someone losing patience. She questioned my authority. The words came out weak, pathetic. Judge Gonzalez stared at him for a long moment. She questioned your authority, the judge repeated slowly. And that's grounds for arrest, in your opinion? Before Patterson could answer, Torres spoke up again. Your Honor, we'd like to show the body camera footage. A screen descended from the ceiling, and the courtroom watched in silence as the events of that night played out in stark digital clarity. Patterson's aggressive tone, Diana's calm responses, the unnecessary escalation, the deliberate tightening of the handcuffs. When it was over, Judge Gonzalez was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to Patterson with an expression that could have melted steel. Sergeant Patterson, what I just witnessed was not police work. It was harassment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Her voice rose with each word. You violated this woman's constitutional rights. You filed a false report, and you brought disgrace on your department. Patterson tried to speak, but Judge Gonzalez wasn't finished. The charges against Major Rodriguez are dismissed with prejudice. Her gavel came down like thunder. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into Sergeant Patterson's conduct and recommending that the FBI review his arrest patterns for potential civil rights violations. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled notes, photographers snapped pictures, and Patterson sat frozen in his chair, like a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. Diana remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. She had known this moment would come from the second Patterson put those handcuffs on her wrists. She had simply waited for the system to catch up to what she already knew. As the crowd began to disperse, Patterson finally looked at her again. This time, there was no swagger, no smirk, no sense of superiority. Just a man who had finally realized he had picked the wrong fight with the wrong person. Diana stood, gathered her things, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back at Patterson. There was no need to. He was no longer her problem. He was the system's problem now, but Patterson's nightmare was just beginning. What Diana had set in motion would ripple far beyond one corrupt cop's career. The real question was, how many other victims would finally get their justice when the full scope of Patterson's crimes came to light? Part 4. The Reckoning. The hallway outside the courtroom felt like a gauntlet. Patterson stumbled through it, his face burning with shame and rage, while whispers followed him like vultures. Other officers he'd worked with for years suddenly found reasons to look the other way. Court staff who used to nod respectfully now stared with barely concealed disgust. His phone had been buzzing nonstop since the judge's ruling. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, all of them carrying the same message. His life as he knew it was over. "Patterson!" The voice cut through the courthouse noise like a blade. He turned to see Chief Ricardo Martinez striding toward him, his expression thunderous. Martinez was a 28-year veteran who had clawed his way up from beat cop to department head, and he didn't suffer fools gladly. "Sir, I can explain." "Conference room, now!" Martinez's voice brooked no argument. They walked in silence to a small meeting room tucked away from the main corridor. The second the door closed, Martinez exploded. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice echoed off the bare walls. "A decorated Air Force major? Are you completely out of your mind?" Patterson's jaw tightened. "I was doing my job. She was disrespectful. She asked you a question." Martinez slammed his hand on the table. "That's not disrespect. That's basic civil rights." He began pacing, his hands clenched behind his back. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this department? The FBI is opening an investigation. The mayor's office has been fielding calls from Washington all morning. The Pentagon wants answers." Patterson felt something cold settle in his stomach. "The Pentagon?" Martinez stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that could have cut glass. "Major Rodriguez isn't just any officer, you moron. She's been briefing generals on Middle East strategy. She has security clearance higher than most senators. When she disappeared for 12 hours, people noticed." The room seemed to spin around Patterson. He had thought he was arresting some uppity woman who needed to be taught a lesson. Instead, he had detained someone whose phone calls were returned by people with real power. "This is insane," Patterson muttered. "How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to know." Martinez's voice rose to a shout. "You were supposed to treat every citizen with basic human dignity, regardless of who they are." He pulled out a thick folder and threw it on the table. "Internal Affairs has been reviewing your cases. 47 stops, Patterson. 39 people of color. Do you see a pattern there?" Patterson stared at the folder like it was a live snake. "Those were legitimate stops. Were they?" Martinez flipped open the folder, revealing page after page of incident reports. Marcus Thompson, pulled over for suspicious behavior while driving in a white neighborhood. Turned out he was a pediatric surgeon heading to the hospital. Shaniqua Williams, arrested for matching the description of a suspect. She was a high school teacher coming home from parent conferences. Each name felt like a punch to Patterson's gut. He remembered those stops, remembered the satisfaction he'd felt when his instincts proved right about troublemakers who needed to be put in their place. Except now he was seeing them through different eyes, through the eyes of a system that was finally holding him accountable. "The district attorney is reviewing every single one of your cases," Martinez continued. "Any convictions based on your arrests are going to be scrutinized. Lawsuits are being filed. The city's legal department is estimating potential damages in the millions." Patterson's knees felt weak. "Chief, I've got 18 years on the force. I've got a family, a mortgage. You should have thought about that before you decided to use your badge as a weapon." Martinez's voice was ice cold. "Effective immediately. You're suspended without pay pending the outcome of the federal investigation." The word federal hit Patterson like a physical blow. This wasn't just about his job anymore. This was about potential criminal charges, prison time, the complete destruction of everything he'd built. "You need to understand something," Martinez said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This department isn't going down with you. We're cooperating fully with the investigation. If they find what I think they're going to find, you're on your own." Patterson stood there, swaying slightly, as the full weight of his situation crashed down on him. 24 hours ago, He had been a respected sergeant with the power to ruin people's lives on a whim. Now he was a liability that his own department was eager to discard. "Turn in your badge and weapon," Martinez ordered. "Security will escort you out." The walk to his desk felt like a death march. Other officers watched from a distance, their expressions ranging from pity to disgust. Patterson cleaned out his desk drawers with shaking hands, each personal item feeling like a relic from a life that no longer existed. His badge felt impossibly heavy as he placed it on Martinez's desk. The weight of 18 years of authority, of respect, of identity, all of it disappearing in a single moment. Meanwhile, across town, Diana sat in a quiet cafe, scrolling through news articles on her tablet. The story had exploded across social media. Air Force major wrongfully arrested. Cop under investigation for racial profiling. Pentagon demands answers in Miami detention case. Her phone buzzed with a call from her commanding officer. "Major Rodriguez, I trust you've seen the coverage?" "I have, sir. The Secretary of Defense wants to speak with you personally. There's also been interest from several civil rights organizations about you speaking publicly on this issue." Diana sipped her coffee, watching the city move around her through the cafe window. "I'm not sure I want to be the poster child for police reform, sir." "I understand that. But what happened to you happens to people every day. People who don't have your rank, your connections, or your resources to fight back." The truth of that statement settled over her like a weight. She thought about all the names in Patterson's file, all the people who had been subjected to his abuse of power without any way to seek justice. What exactly are they asking me to do? Tell your story. Show people that this isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that allows officers like Patterson to operate unchecked for years. Diana set down her coffee cup, her decision crystallizing. "Set up the meetings, sir. If my story can help change things, then that's what we need to do." Patterson's fall from grace was just the beginning. As the investigation widened and more victims came forward, Diana realized that her fight for justice had become something much larger, a reckoning that would expose the rot at the heart of a system that had protected men like Patterson for far too long. But the biggest question remained: would real change come from this moment, or would it all fade away once the headlines moved on to the next story? 6 months later, Diana stood at the podium of the Miami Convention Center, looking out at an audience of police chiefs, civil rights activists, military leaders, and everyday citizens who had traveled from across the country to hear her speak. The conference room was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and others watching via live stream. The title of her speech was simple: "When Power Goes Unchecked." "I didn't set out to become the face of police reform," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "6 months ago, I was just a woman driving home after a long day, humming along to old music on the radio." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But sometimes life puts you in a position where you have to choose: stay silent and let injustice continue, or speak up and risk everything to make things right. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the crowd. In the front row, she saw faces she now knew well, other victims of Patterson's abuse who had found the courage to come forward after her case made headlines. Marcus Thompson, the pediatric surgeon who had been humiliated during a traffic stop while rushing to save a child's life. Shaniqua Williams, the teacher who had spent a night in jail for the crime of matching a description while driving home from parent conferences. James Rivera, the veteran who had been pepper sprayed for asking why he was being detained. All of them had been voiceless until Diana's case gave them a platform. "The night Officer Patterson arrested me, he thought he was dealing with just another person he could intimidate into submission," Diana continued. "He was wrong about who I was, but more importantly, he was wrong about what I would do." The investigation that followed her arrest had been devastating for the Miami-Dade Police Department. Patterson himself was now facing federal civil rights charges and had become the poster child for everything wrong with modern policing. 3 other officers had been suspended pending investigation. The entire department was under federal oversight. But the real victory wasn't Patterson's downfall, It was what came after. Real change doesn't happen in courtrooms, Diana said, her voice growing stronger. It happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that extraordinary injustice is just the way things are. She clicked to the next slide of her presentation, showing statistics from the past 6 months. Complaint filings against police officers were up 400% in Miami-Dade County. Body camera malfunctions, previously a common excuse for missing evidence, had dropped to nearly zero. Most importantly, traffic stops in minority neighborhoods had decreased by 60%, suggesting that officers were finally being held accountable for their patterns of behavior. Change is possible, Diana said, but only if we're willing to fight for it. After her speech, Diana was approached by a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. She was nervous, fidgeting with the strap of her purse as she waited for the crowd around Diana to thin out. "Major Rodriguez?" The woman finally spoke up. "My name is Carmen Santos. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "Last month, I got pulled over by a Miami police officer. He was aggressive. Started asking me questions that had nothing to do with why he stopped me, but then I remembered your story and I started recording on my phone." She pulled out her cell phone, showing Diana a video of the encounter. The moment he saw the camera, his whole attitude changed. He gave me a warning for the broken taillight and let me go. Diana felt a surge of emotion. This was why she had chosen to speak publicly, why she had endured months of media attention and death threats from people who thought she should have just kept quiet. "You probably saved me from a night in jail," Carmen continued. "Maybe worse. And you taught me that I don't have to just take it when someone with power tries to abuse that power." That evening, Diana sat in her hotel room, scrolling through social media responses to her speech. The comments were a mix of support and criticism, praise and hate, hope and despair, exactly what she expected from a country still struggling to reconcile its ideals with its reality. But one comment stood out, posted by someone named Marcus Thompson, MD. "To anyone reading this, Diana Rodriguez saved my career, my reputation, and probably my life by having the courage to stand up when it mattered. If you ever find yourself in a situation where power is being abused, remember her example. Don't stay silent. Don't accept injustice as inevitable. Fight back, because that's the only way things change." Diana closed her laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the Miami skyline, glittering in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Patterson was probably sitting in his own home, unemployed and facing federal charges, wondering how his life had fallen apart so quickly. She didn't feel sorry for him. Men who abuse power for years don't deserve sympathy when that power is finally taken away. But she did feel hope for the future. Hope that the next time someone like Patterson tried to intimidate an innocent person, that person would remember her story and refuse to be a victim. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her commanding officer. "Saw your speech online. Proud of you. The Pentagon is creating a new civilian military liaison position focused on civil rights. Interested?" Diana smiled as she typed her response. "Send me the details." The fight wasn't over. It probably never would be. But for the first time in months, Diana felt like they were winning. Power unchecked becomes power abused. But when ordinary people refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice, extraordinary things can happen. What happened to Diana Rodriguez happens to people every single day. People who don't have her rank, her connections, or her platform to fight back. But her story proves that change is possible when we refuse to accept that abuse of power is just the way things are. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If it made you angry, channel that anger into action. And if it made you realize how much work is left to be done, then find a way to be part of the solution. Because real change doesn't start with politicians or police chiefs or military leaders. It starts with people like you, refusing to stay silent when silence means letting injustice continue. The question isn't whether you have the power to make a difference. The question is whether you'll choose to use it.